Okay. What was your assignment for today?
Peer review and read Brody.
So read Brody 2011. What else was your assignment for today?
Peer review.
Peer review. Hand those in, and I will pass them off to Dr. Jim.
I felt like a menace to society.
Sonia brings up a valid point that we had no control over you, like reviewing one another's papers and then telling one another what they did wrong and then going back and revising it and putting it out again, blah, 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 blah. But then you wouldn't have anything to write on the paper of your peer because it would look perfect. And then, like, you wouldn't have anything to turn in. And also, the paper that you gave to your peer to review would look different than the paper that you finally turn in, and so that would be weird. And so, don't be suspicious. Don't be looking for people to be playing fast and loose with the rules. Live a little bit. Just relax.
I'm never relaxed.
No, you strike me as the type who would be never relaxed. Congratulations.
For surviving? What?
It's November, and you're still here.
Yeah.
We're not dropouts. We're not dropouts.
You've made it. You've made it this far.
Yep.
How is it going so far?
Not good.
Not good. But you're still here.
Okay, but being still here and passing are two different things. Period. Yeah.
Well, if you were here and you think you're worried about not passing, you might want to reconsider whether you should be here or not. Yes, Sam.
I've had a great time in this class, but I think I've also learned that I think the biology route is not for me, like in the future. But I can't lie, I've had a good time in the class.
What makes you think that biology is not for you?
To be honest, the workload. I've talked to some of the biology people in the upper class, and
They told you that the workload doesn't really change any, does it?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
It's always the standard. I think, like I say, you can teach it, but I think the standard gets higher, but more people are used to it, and I haven't been able to really get used to it, so it's probably just not for me.
So,
Get on.
We love the honesty. We appreciate it.
so Frodo was just wasting his time.
I don't know who Frodo is. I'm sorry.
What are the rings you wear?
Frodo Baggins?
Oh God, yeah, I love Lord of the Rings. Precious.
So much work, so much sacrifice, and in the end, he saved the world.
Yeah, that's not me.
I would have.
Okay.
I Sam.
Sam carried Frodo in the end up the last part of the mountain.
Yeah, because he was gonna. Hold on, I watched.
And then
This was in Big Bang. Hold on, no, this was in Big Bang. Then you get like
you see Big Bang, but
the
not
Big Bang
Lord of the
Theory.
Rings.
Yeah, y'all watch that? It's like Sheldon.
That is
And
not
like-
Lord of the Rings.
No, but it's in the Big Bang. Like they have an episode about it where like he has the ring.
Just causing me a second.
This class is making me think
Why?
Okay.
I love it here.
We're negatively affecting Trevor, so we're gonna stop. So it's ultimately it's your life, what major you pursue and things like that. So, but I'm just kind of wondering how you're feeling. Like, are you feeling stressed?
Depressed.
Are you handling it?
Depression if I'm honest.
All the time. All
I'm
the time.
dumb. I feel really dumb.
Trevor, you're a senior.
So I took this class. Both my mom and my dad are both biologists in some way. And I took this class. I'm probably one of the only people that enjoy biology in my family. And I was like, man, I kind of hate biology. And it started out down here. I was like, this kind of sucks. And then this second test, I was like, man, this is kind of fun. I'm kind of digging this. Learning about photosynthesis and stuff. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah. It is difficult, but
Didn't you say it was like the hardest that you've taken so far? Like
the second test.
no, like in general this class.
No, no. Structural analysis is by far the hardest. Building buildings, that's hard. That's hard stuff.
Yeah, and if you make a mistake, people die.
Well,
Here, just like use a couple grasses.
That's still important, though.
Dr. Tate fixes everything, Trevor. Dr. Tate fixes everything.
All right.
No, really.
All right, this is your last case study. So from here to the end of this semester, we're going to be talking about snakes and newts. Is this news to you? You didn't read?
No, I did. I
Brody,
just saying I
2001?
don't. I just
No,
don't
okay,
like
I
it. Pictures
see.
were kind of
Okay, all right.
Stop.
How did? Focus, focus. How was reading the chapter?
So long. Yeah, so long.
So long. Was it approachable?
It was long. It was like a narration.
Okay, so telling a story. Luckily for you, it covers all of the papers that we're going to actually cover in here. So this is a little bit of a different way of teaching because we just don't ever do things the same way. So the first half of this case study is going to be taught kind of the way we've been teaching you. The last half of the case study is going to be totally based on literature related to the case study. So the first of these, which is Brody and Birdie 1990, which is the first piece of literature in the daily schedule that is on the Moodle site, that is the one that you need to write a literature summary on. Keep in mind, it's not at the end of the case study this time, it's in the middle of the case study. So you should definitely start reading that now because you wanna not put it off until the last minute. And then from then on out, we're gonna be reading a paper a day. And the teaching is going to be kind of the way your discussions of literature have been in the past. You're gonna come in, you will have read the paper, done your best to absorb and understand the paper. We will have a set of discussion questions for you. You will break up into your groups, you will discuss things. We'll sum up things at the end, and then you'll go home and you'll read another paper in preparation for the next day's work. You only write one literature summary, but you need to be doing the readings because we want you to come in and discuss those readings rather than us just tell you what is in those readings. So just the one literature summary, but a lot of reading.
Do you know off the top of your head when that literature summary is going to be due?
I don't, but it's on the little site.
Friday after. Third, fourth.
So it's like it was in your email.
Like the Friday.
Yeah, I put it in the email.
Hey,
So,
I think it's.
Yeah.
You know what? I'll just go on a search for it.
yeah, I sent an email yesterday and I put all that information. Okay, so this case study is a case study dealing with snakes and newts. My computer started doing this in Marston 204, and now it's doing it in here. And I hate it. Right. So this is a case study about snakes and newts. In this case, the snake is a predator and it feeds on the newt. And this particular type of newt creates a toxin called tetrodotoxin, and that toxin basically blocks nerve transmission, the function of nerve cells, and so it paralyzes anything that that basically gets tetrodotoxin in its system. And then the snake has evolved resistance to tetrodotoxin. So they're in a predator-prey interaction where they're co-evolving. As the newt becomes more toxic, the snake becomes more resistant. As the snake becomes more resistant, the newt becomes more toxic, and that's kind of the nature of this particular interaction. So the first thing that we want to do today is we want to talk about this thing called the predation sequence. I might have mentioned this in the past. It's just a good way of thinking about organisms that are in predator-prey interactions. And then we're going to just kind of go through this chapter and get an overview of the paper. And in the paper, there's information that is useful for the case study, but there's also a lot of useful information in terms of kind of how people do science in there, and that's one of the things we want to call attention to. So this is a paper from Lima and Dill in 1990. It basically kind of sums up the idea of why predator-prey interactions are important. During any given day, an animal may fail to obtain a meal and go hungry, or may fail to obtain matings and thus realize no reproductive success. But in the long term, the day's shortcomings may have minimal effect on lifetime fitness. You can always eat food tomorrow, you can always mate with somebody tomorrow if you didn't get around to that today. Few failures, however, are as unforgiving as the failure to avoid a predator. Being killed greatly increases future fitness. Predation may thus be a strong selective force over evolutionary time, and has long been recognized as important in the evolution of adaptations such as cryptic and aposematic coloration, protective armor, chemical defenses, etc. So this idea that the outcome of a predator-prey interaction, if you're the prey, is you're dead. It's over. You're done. If you didn't get around to mating before you got killed and eaten, your fitness is 0. So that's it. So we're going to use this term adaptation a lot more in this case study than we have in any of the previous case studies, even though the beak of the finch might be considered an adaptation for feeding. When you guys use the term adaptation, how do you define it? How's that?
Restate the question one more time.
How would you define adaptation? If you went home for Thanksgiving and your mom asked you what you were studying and you said, oh, we're studying adaptation, and she said, oh, what's that? What would you say?
Well, definitely, I would say it's like, try not to use adapt in my definition.
Yes, that would be good.
It's like how something changes to like its environment. I don't know, something like that.
Okay. What process results in adaptation?
Say what?
What process would result in adaptation?
Oh, evolution or something like that.
Evolution via what? So remember, there are 4 forces of evolutionary change.
Say what?
There are 4 forces of evolutionary change. You guys remember what they are?
Anybody? Yeah.
Yeah, anybody.
Natural selection. Random genetic drift.
Selection, random.
Mating part selection.
That's part of selection. It can't be part of selection.
All right.
Random genetic drift, selection, what else? That would be selection.
Ooh, I know this one.
I'm sure you do.
No, it's
Assortative breeding?
That's
That's
once again selection.
the one where they leave.
Oh.
Where they leave and go someplace else?
Migration.
Immigration.
Migration?
Immigration.
Immigrants.
Well, migration is more general because immigration is immigration into a population. Immigration with an E, and one N is out of a population. So just say migration. What's the other thing? Mutation.
Oh,
Okay.
that's good.
All right.
Good job,
Good.
guys.
Wouldn't also
Those would be
selection drift though?
Hmm?
Wouldn't that also be in random genetic drift?
Would what else would be in random?
Yeah. That's what
What's up here?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but wouldn't the mutation be included in genetic drift?
No, it's a separate process. Mutation is the generation of new genes. Now, random genetic drift is oftentimes what happens to new mutations. They're in the population, they're in such low frequency when they're new mutations that they just drift out of the population through random genetic drift. The mutation itself is different. Different
Like
process.
when an asteroid kills
So-
half the thing.
Adaptation, that'd be like selection, right?
Yeah, so adaptation is the outcome of selection.
Yeah.
Give your group a point.
Oh, got it.
Sorry, that was a low throw on my
Oh,
part.
no, it's okay. I'll
Um,
do myself.
So adaptation is one of the outcomes of selection. So you can just keep it back there.
Oh,
or you
sure,
can put it
sure.
right. So you also mentioned kind of the fit of the organism to the environment, the matching of the organism's capacities to the environment, and that's actually not a bad way of thinking about adaptation. It's a trait, could be a physiological trait, could be a morphological trait, could be a behavioral trait that essentially improves an individual's fitness. That is the result of natural selection leading to that trait. Now, we have to distinguish that from variations and traits that might come about through other processes other than natural selection that just happen to also improve the fitness of an organism. And so two people, Gould and Verba, made this distinction fairly unambiguously in that we use adaptation in a variety of different ways, and because of that, we need to, before you run that race, in order to get acclimated to lower concentrations in oxygen at high elevation, acclimated to something. You guys just went through acclimation. What acclimation did you just recently go through as human beings?
Weather change.
It's weather change, yeah. When the weather first started getting colder, you threw on sweaters, et cetera, et cetera. In February, when we get the first warm days of February, you're gonna be peeling off those layers of clothes. So for example, I forgot my cell phone. This is one day a year when I wanna use my cell phone. Can I borrow your cell phone? So my wife would say, hey honey, you wanna go out tonight? And so I would do that via text, and I would use my keypad, which uses my thumbs.
Yeah.
Now,
We didn't have thumbs.
We didn't just automatically get thumbs when.
And then all of a
Steve
sudden,
Jobs came out
thumbs
with
just
thumbs.
grew.
so the opposable thumb is an application that enables us to grab things firmly. As a climbing primate, back in our early history, opposable thumbs were useful because it enabled you to grab things more firmly. Have you ever tried grabbing something with just your fingers and not involving your thumbs? It's easy to rip that right out of your hand. Hook your thumb around it, it's harder to rip that out of your hand. The original purpose of enabling a firmer grasp. And so Gould and Verba make the point in their paper in 1982 that we should reserve the term adaptation for things that evolve for whatever the current utility is. Now, while you guys text, you guys also still grab plenty of things as well.
With evolving and adapting to its environment, somewhere between 55 and 70 million years ago, gorillas, chimps, lemurs, golden lion tamarins, all have just simply inherited the thumb from that ancestor.
Orangutans.
That's actually the first.
So-
That's actually the first human ever.
We all evolved from Douglas Martin Boyer, evidently.
No way.
It is in yellow,
Look at those nice thumbs.
I have a weight
We could also put forth the hypothesis that the thumb evolved for hitchhiking. There are lots of uses that we have attached to the thumb. Dr. Doug, can you give me my screen back?
It's going slow.
Thank you.
Is the death of a brand really real anymore?
Yeah, for real.
What?
Says it's the death of brand.
Right. So we knew what these salamanders looked like because these salamanders looked basically like blades of grass. And we got good, because we had spent a lot of time out there, at distinguishing what was a blade of grass versus what was a salamander hanging out in the water column. And so the difference between us was that we had a search image that allowed us to recognize salamanders when we saw them. That's the kind of thing that helps with the recognition phase of predation. Once you've recognized that it's prey, you have to catch prey. What kind of adaptations might you have as a predator at this phase? Claws, yes. Now is when we have claws. What else?
Beaks.
Hmm?
like beak.
Beaks,
Speed.
speed,
Teeth.
Sharp.
teeth,
Oh, yeah.
sharp
Yeah.
weapons of offense. But then you can catch something and then it gets away from you. What are some adaptations that you might have to take you from the catching of prey to the killing and eating of prey?
Venom.
You might have venom, certainly. Hmm?
Paralysis.
Yeah, you might have venom that paralyzes your prey. What else might you have? You might have strength.
You have a strategy.
You might have an evolved strategy that helps you handle the prey. So we can think about all those things in terms of predator adaptations, and we can also think of them, though, in terms of counter adaptations by prey. So if improved visual acuity is an adaptation for finding prey when you're searching for it, Caden, what's an adaptation for that?
Camouflage.
Camouflage, crypsis, looking like something that you're not. I watch movies as one of the things I do to kind of relax. You guys know what film this is from?
Yeah, oh, God. Just, oh, he's like a sniper.
He's a sniper. It's
Oh, what's that? I love that movie.
Tom Cruise.
not Tom Cruise.
So-
Worse, so much worse than Tom Cruise. Donnie Wahlberg.
Yeah, no.
No, sorry, Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah, Mark
Mark Wahlberg.
Mark Wahlberg was good in this. He shot the dude in the hand because he had the shotgun.
Get a
He
shot.
didn't,
You
he
couldn't
didn't
make that
shoot
shot.
anyone.
Ted.
Come back to us, Sam. Come back.
Sorry.
He's in a ghillie suit. A ghillie suit is just a suit that breaks up the outline of your body so that you don't look like a human, because it gets rid of all of the hard edges that represent where your skin interfaces with the environment. This is an example of camouflage from pop culture. Recognition of prey, we have things like search images and learning what your prey looks like or smells like, things like this. Counter adaptations are things like masquerading as other things. Inchworms look like twigs. Another form of masquerading is aposematism. Who can tell me what aposematism is?
Ah,
It's when you
Are very colorful.
very colorful because you are poisonous, dangerous, whatever. But we see this in coral snakes. These are a bunch of coral snakes from around the Western Hemisphere. Two things to take from this figure. One is that aposematism is usually made up of bright, contrasty colors. The other thing is that when you're in other parts of the world other than the United States, you should not pick up banded snakes. Because while coral snakes in the United States are red on yellow, kill a fellow, red on black, friend of Jack, if you go to South America or Central America, black on white can kill Jack. Red on black can kill Jack. Lots of things can kill Jack. Just don't pick up banded snakes anywhere that you go. Now, this is how dangerous things avoid being attacked and eaten. What happens to non-dangerous things that want to avoid being killed and eaten? Yes?
Just copies them.
They can mimic. So here we have, these are coral snakes. This is from that same book. These are all coral snakes that are venomous on one side, and these are all milk snakes for the most part that are non-venomous. And so once again, you can avoid becoming prey by mimicking the color pattern of a dangerous organism. Now, this is a Honduran milk snake. Did this Honduran milk snake try to look more like one of these coral snakes?
probably not.
No, of course not. It started out with a color pattern that was probably similar. We resembled that, and over time through evolution and natural selection, you found that the color patterns became closer and closer to the color pattern of the coral snake, because snakes got better and better at recognizing coral snake patterns versus milk snake patterns, until you had this convergent evolution in color pattern going on. So aposematism goes hand in hand with mimicry. Not all aposematically colored species also have mimics that mimic them, but in many cases they do. Catching prey, you can sneak up on your prey, you can have weapons of offense. You gave us many weapons of offense. But you can also, if you're a prey species, you can do things that, for example, signal to the predator that you already know that they're there. So it's kind of the nanny boo-boo defense. If you can spot the predator at a very far distance and can signal to the predator that you've already seen that predator, it might stave off an attack before the attack even starts. You might also be able to deflect an attack. You might have something like a startle response. You guys know what a startle response is?
Like possums when they,
What?
like possums when they play possum.
It's not a startle response,
Like
actually.
horses kicking.
So horses kicking might be it.
Like a skunk spray.
A possum is weird, because I don't know what the adaptive significance is of a possum suddenly acting like it's dead. What? Yeah, so once again, I don't know what the utility of that is, because that just seems to me like the predator that should then say,
Well, possums also like leak
that's
this
the
really
point.
nasty stuff, so it makes it smell really bad.
so snakes do that also as part of that, and I didn't know that possums did that. Yeah, if I came upon a fainted, what was that?
Well, like the fainted goats, the whole reason like they faint, like use of them, like do you put them in the more expensive livestock? And that way when a predator does come around, their whole point is to get eaten, because they'll freeze up and
Oh.
then the livestock goes away.
Wow,
Once
that
again-
sucks. That sucks.
Once again, that's a
That sucks.
terrible adaptation to try and avoid predation.
I hate that. That sucks.
Sam, do you have something to add?
Yeah, skunk.
So a skunk, that would, in my mind, that would be a weapon of offense.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Porcupines, once again, would be weapons, or weapons of defense, rather, not
Yeah.
offense.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Weapons of defense.
What about the lizards that drop the tail, like the geckos?
So that's a form of avoiding being captured in that it's kind of a distraction. So they drop out a body part, it keeps wriggling on the ground while the predator's like, oh, I got something, and then the lizard itself runs away.
What about the squirrels when they do their thing?
I need a little
Okay,
more.
okay. So I saw this actually like a couple months ago. Like there's a bunch of squirrels on campus, right?
Uh-huh.
And then I was walking by the squirrel and it like put its tail over its back and like started like screeching at me. And
Yeah.
I was like, what? And then there was like a chain of squirrels and they were all like,
Yeah, so they can, so squirrels, ground squirrels, other squirrels are well known for giving what they call alarm calls to warn other squirrels that there's a predator in the area. Now, one of the downsides of that is that when you make an alarm call, you're calling attention to the predator that not only have you seen it, but also it tells the predator exactly where you are, so you might actually take a fitness hit there. Anybody ever kill a rabbit? Sorry, somebody has a pet rabbit here in the class.
jelly belly.
Too close to home.
Sorry.
Too close to home.
What happens when you try and kill a rabbit?
It screams.
Oh my God, it screams.
You killed one?
Tell us a story.
No.
I worked at a zoo when I was younger,
Oh.
and we had to feed the boas, and we fed boas these giant domestic rabbits, and you had to kill them before you put them in with the boas so that they didn't inadvertently kill the boa while defending themselves. And the first time I went to kill the rabbit, I was unfamiliar with the alarm calls of rabbits, and while I was in the process of cervically dislocating it, it screamed, and then the rabbit ran away. And I'm in this enclosure behind the reptile house, the amphibian reptile house, and I'm running around in circles chasing this rabbit. And while I'm doing that, the zoo director walks around the corner and he looks at me. I'm panting, I'm sweating, it's in East Texas. And he looks at me and he's like, you let the rabbit get away, didn't you? Like, yeah, I let the rabbit get away. Because it screamed, I took my attention off of it for just a second, and that was the split second that it needed to escape. I caught it, and I fed it to the reticulated pipe. Sorry for Jelly Bean.
Jelly belly.
Do not tell Jelly Bean this story, and I'm sorry for
Jelly bean needs to be dispatched.
This is an animal stotting. This is a type of gazelle stotting, doing a behavior called stotting in southern Africa. This is a very stereotyped response. They stiffen their legs and they go boing, 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 boing. And they do this when they see a predator, and it's an advertisement to the predator, nanny, nanny, booey, boo, I've seen you. You can go ahead and start chasing me, but as soon as you start chasing me, I'm gonna leave stotting mode and go into harass mode, and you're never gonna catch me.
Period. Yeah.
That's so bad.
That's a good.
Defensive armature in things like turtles, and then defensive horns and things like this with horn lizards, which we've already talked about at one point in this class. Once you're caught, then things are getting desperate if you're prey, because the animal, the predator now has you under their control, and so you need to have ways of getting out of that if at all possible. And so in some cases you might have subduing skills, which are many of the same kinds of skills that you have in catching prey, but then you might also have the detoxification ability, which is of course very useful if one of the strategies of the prey is that you are toxic. And this is precisely the situation that we have with the snakes and the newts. The newts produce tetrodotoxin, which stops nerve impulse transmission, and the snakes have the ability to be immune to this toxin. So, that's the predation sequence. For this, you should know what the different stages are. You should be able to provide some examples of what predator adaptations are that help them be good predators, and what prey adaptations are that help them from becoming prey. Yeah?
Why does like prey always have like so many more babies than predators? They like
You
bunnies.
stop me.
Bunnies always have like giant, like, was that because of they get hunted by predators or?
It's a mammalian pattern, right?
Pardon?
That's a mammalian pattern.
Yeah,
maybe.
first I would have to buy into the fact that that's a generalized observation that's true.
You can just say I'm wrong. That's
No,
fine.
no, it's a good question. So this is how you think through a question like that. One of the things we should be training you in doing is thinking through it. So you're starting from a couple of instances and then making a generality, and then what my brain does is say, okay, is that generality truly general? So there's a whole area of ecology that we don't really even talk about in this class. You think that we give you everything, but we just give you a little snapshot of limited number of things that deals with how many offspring you have, because you have a set amount of energy to devote to getting around in life. Part of that energy goes to growth and reproduction. Part of that energy goes to growth and maintenance. The other part of that energy goes to things like reproduction. So then within that pool of energy that you have for reproduction, you can divide that up into a couple of really big offspring, or you can divide that up into a bunch of really small offspring. And those are all evolutionary choices, so to speak, that organisms make. And so I would have to think about the generality of your statement to think about all of the predators, whether they're invertebrate predators versus vertebrate predators, et cetera, to see if that was generally true, that predators generally have fewer offspring than, for example, other organisms in that same group. So for example, if there was a predatory beetle, I would want to look at non-predatory beetles and then see if there's a pattern within beetles. I would have to do the same thing with other plant organisms to see if fish, for example. So you would have to look at it within clades, because there's also variation that is specific to clades. Fish, for example, all of the fishes are just really well known for just having tons of babies.
Yeah.
So then within fish, we would have to say, well, where are you on the food chain? How high up are you? How predatory are you in a sense? To then see if that's a generalizable sort of statement. And then at that point, we could actually maybe answer that question. And so short answer is, I'm not sure that that's the case. I would have to actually do quite a lot of reading and research to figure out if that is the case.
Yeah, my bad.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. The difference between the answer you would get in high school and the answer you get in college, it has nuance to it, rather than, no, that's not true, yes, that is true.
Gotcha.
This is Tarica granulosa. This is the newt. Its body is covered with bumps. What are all those bumps?
Pores.
They're not, well, they're not pores per se, but they.
Warts.
Oh, warts. They're not warts, actually. We just don't use that term with salamanders generally. We generally reserve that term for toads, but they're very similar to the warts of toads in that they are more specifically, what are they?
They hold toxin?
They're toxin glands. They're granular glands in particular. They're a type of gland that is the gland that produces tetrodotoxin. Where are these distributed on the body of this snoot?
All
They're
over the skin.
everywhere. They're all over the skin. These things produce a lot of tetrodotoxin, and tetrodotoxin is one of the most potent poisons on the planet. These are newts from Oregon primarily. They have a stereotyped response to being harassed in that they curl their bodies up, they curl their backs up, and they expose the underside of their neck and their feet and the underside of the tail. And when they do that, they reveal this bright orange coloration. What is this referred to?
Aposematism.
This is aposematism. This is specifically called the Unken reflex. It's a German word. It has umlauts on it, which is why I pronounce it Unken rather than Unken. But that's the aposematic display that warns a predator, hey, you really don't want to eat me because that's going to be really bad for you. So we get to the story. There's this guy named Butch Brody III. He is now at the University of Virginia. At the time that he started doing this work, he was a graduate student at the University of Chicago, working in Steve Arnold's lab. What was he doing in Oregon when he noticed that some snakes were eating some things that maybe they shouldn't be eating?
He was barfing.
So he was catching snakes, and when he caught snakes, he would palpate their stomachs, get them to regurgitate their food so that he could make a note of what they had been eating, and he found that they were.
Eating those newts.
In some cases, they were eating newts. What was he doing there, though, when he was there doing this with snakes? He was actually interested in different species of snake. He was interested in Thamnophis rhodinoides, which is one species of garter snake, but he found that Thamnophis sertalis was the species of snake that was mainly eating newts. This is him with a bunch of Thamnophis rhodinoides at his grandmother's house, which was one of his field sites. It's nice when your grandmother's house is also a field site, because you presumably get cookies and snakes all
Wait,
at
so
the same
there's
time.
poisonous newts at his grandma's house?
Poisonous newts all over the western United States.
Weren't the snakes biting them?
Hmm?
Weren't the snakes biting them?
They don't really bite. Garter snakes are generally a fairly docile snake.
I've picked up snakes and they tried to bite me before.
Probably picked them up wrong.
I was just trying to grab the tail.
So you could use newts for murder then? Because you could just pick one up on the ground and then use it?
Yes, and these,
Kill somebody?
yeah, and before this set of papers became kind of more popularly used in textbooks and stuff like that, nobody had ever heard of tetrodotoxin, and now you regularly see tetrodotoxin being used as a murder weapon in crime procedurals on TV and things like this. Also, there's a movie called, is it Matilda?
What?
Yes, when they had the news.
Matilda, and they put a newt in her glass of water, the teacher's glass of water in Matilda, and
Murder.
yeah, it was a Tarika newt, as it turns out. So clearly they were not thinking about the fact that they might have actually killed the teacher if she had actually drank water. Anyway, that's off topic. What was he doing in Oregon in the first place? Did he go there to study Tarika granulosa?
I don't remember.
He was not. He was there because he was interested in the genetics of color pattern in this species. This species is a species that has striped morphs and has checkered morphs, and he was there looking to see what role those different color patterns might have once again in predator-prey interactions. While he was there, he found that some of the snakes that he saw were actually eating these newts. The species that he saw eating the newts are this species. This is Thamnophis sertalis. This is also taken at a lake in Oregon. So he was basically studying the evolution of color pattern and behavior to see if these two traits were actually correlated with one another. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the future. While he was there, he found that snakes were eating newts. And when he found that these snakes were eating newts, what did he remember from his past?
His father.
He remembered his father because his father did something when he was an undergraduate. This was back before undergraduate research was really a thing, because it was the 1960s. All of you someday will do undergraduate research because it's required of the biology major. So if you stay a biology major, you will do undergraduate research your junior and senior year. Back in the 1960s, that was not really much of a thing. But one day, Butch Brody the elder, Butch Brody Jr., went into his academic advisor's office and said, hey, I want to do research. What can I do? What did that advisor tell him? What's the title of the chapter we had you read? What is it?
Title?
Yeah.
Patterns, process, and the parable of the coffee pot incident are races.
And what's the coffee pot incident?
Oh no. Oh, isn't that what it is? Go ahead.
these fishermen,
You saw 3 dudes in the forest and they were dead, no signs of struggle, but the only thing at the scene was a newt boiled in a coffee pot.
yes, these 3 fishermen were at the edge of a stream in Oregon, all dead, no signs of struggle, all their gear was still there, no signs of theft. This is right out of a TV crime procedural. The only thing that they found at all that indicated what might be amiss is that they found inside the coffee pot that was still on fire was a newt inside the coffee pot. Presumably what they had done, they had gone down to the water's edge, scooped up some water from the stream, inadvertently scooped up a newt while they did that, put it on the fire, put their coffee in there, drank it, and killed themselves.
Aw, that's so sad.
So they made a request. What's that?
Be a terrible way to go out.
It's probably peaceful because you just kind of get paralyzed and then
Yeah, but like,
And then you're
freak
dead.
accident like that.
What if you were the dude that didn't drink the coffee that day? You look over and your buddies are just.
They were all 3 dead. They killed all of them. Which I don't drink coffee.
Don't you like, hey, bro, this coffee's so good.
So-
Is that why you don't drink coffee?
No, I upsets my stomach, but I'm glad that I don't drink coffee now that I know the story. Yeah.
Okay, so they were talking in the article about, like the racetrack thing. Is that where you kind of got the idea for the racetrack on the study?
That is exactly where I got the for the racetrack for running animals down tracks. Is the older Bush Birdie was a permit chair in the department where I was a graduate student in my PhD program. So I saw them racing tons of snakes down racetracks. I also know other people who race other things down racetracks. It's a general clean if needed.
How do you know you're getting them to go the fastest?
What?
How do you know you're getting them to go the fastest? then?
We run them multiple times and then we take the fastest time. So his dad, Butch Birdie's dad, Butch Birdie Jr., went to his professor, said, hey, I want to do research. His professor said, hey, there's this thing that I just read about. These fishermen died and maybe they got killed by a newt. Why don't you do something that figures out whether or not they actually died by newt? That's by newt.
So sad.
So what did his father do? These are the Brodies. These are the Brodies. They are into fishing. If you're wondering if genetics is a thing, this is the dad. This is the son.
Pretty cool to me.
What did the dad do for his undergraduate thesis that then became his master's thesis? He got a bunch of animals and he fed them newt skin.
Oh, yeah.
And then he waited to see how long it took for them to die and if they died at all. And what he found was that most things died. 2 minutes to death, 2.5 minutes to death, 6 minutes, 17 minutes to death, 8 minutes to death, 20 minutes to death, 38 minutes, 68 minutes, 44 minutes, and some of them actually lived. These are Thamnophis garter snakes.
Snake. Oh, the world is so cool. How that just works is so cool.
So
My dad's not allowed.
he fed them to fish because these things breed in water and they might be eaten by fish. Fish also died relatively quickly. So there's something about these Thamnophis garter snakes that actually makes them immune to this toxin. Bob Storm was the guy who oversaw his thesis. This is what an acknowledgement section looks like for those of you working on your paper. You've seen them in other papers. This is the acknowledgement section here. The only reason I have it here is so you have another example of an acknowledgement section. So they had a bunch of questions that came out of this. What are the ecological forces that push snakes to eat poisonous prey? Because if you come up against poisonous prey, what's just the first thing that you should do?
Leave it alone.
Not eat it?
Just not eat it. But these guys ate it anyway. Was this resistance accidental byproduct of the garter snake's physiology? Or was this resistance in the snake actually an evolved response, an adaptation to eating toxic prey? What mechanisms enable these garter snakes to resist a toxin that killed virtually every other vertebrate predator that it was given to? And were these resistant snakes the evolutionary cause of extreme toxicity in these newts? Some populations of these newts are so venomous that a single newt would be capable of killing multiple adult humans. And so this is a case of relatively extreme toxicity. So Little Butch worked in the lab of Stephen Arnold. Stephen Arnold studies garter snakes, among other things. And one of the things that he did back in the 1980s was he did a set of behavioral studies where he looked at the tendency of snakes to respond to scent cues. So he would rub a Q-tip on a potential prey item and then present that to the snake, and then he would count how fast the snake tongue flicked. When a snake sticks out its tongue, it's gathering scent particles on the fork of its tongue, and then it pulls them into the mouth. And if you've ever looked inside the mouth of a snake, you guys look inside the mouths of snakes?
No.
We'll do scared.
On the upper side of the roof of the mouth of the snake, the palate's not there. The opening of the mouth opens directly into the nasal mucosa. They pull the tongue back into the mouth, wave those forked tongue tips in that nasal mucosa and transfer scent particles directly to the olfactory epithelium. And so they have, usually in most cases, very good senses of smell. And what he found was that coastal populations tended to eat a lot of slugs because it's a moist environment and slugs are really common there. Inland populations tended to not eat a lot of slugs. So this is a feeding score where you're at a 10 if you eat a lot of slugs, and you're at a 0 if you don't eat a lot of slugs. And then when he crossed these to look at the genetics of this underlying preference, he basically found that when he crossed inland populations with coastal populations, they ended up looking much more like inland populations in the offspring. What he concluded from this study and a lot of other studies is that Thamnophis garter snakes are dietary specialists, and a lot of their dietary specialty comes from their ability to smell the prey. So within garter snakes, you have some garter snakes that are slug specialists, you have some garter snakes that are fish specialists, you have some garter snakes that specialize on frogs, you have some garter snakes that specialize on salamanders. And once you kind of start down that evolutionary path, you're kind of stuck with that. And so this type of evolution where you co-evolve to something happening in your prey is much more likely if you already have a prey specialization. And so Little Butch was already thinking these things when he encountered this rediscovery of his father's work on Tarica, that prey specialization might be important in kind of locking these snakes into eating a particular type of prey. Now that they're locked into eating that particular type of prey, they then have to adjust to that prey as that prey evolves a response to predation. So here is a garter snake eating a newt.
Wow.
Strangely enough, I have a bumper sticker that I have yet to put on a car that is a line drawing of this photo.
People are gonna think they.
So this gets Little Butch and his father Big Butch. That is how they are known by people who know them. They're both Butches. Edmund Brody Jr., I don't know why they called them Butch. These two guys, what got them started on all of this was Little Butch's kind of rediscovery, reacquaintance with the work of his father, and this sent them on a trajectory of doing research together that has basically sustained both of their research careers to this day. Big Butch is now retired, he lives in Central Texas, but they still continue to work and publish on this. So what we'll talk about at the beginning of the class next time is go back and revisit this chapter. As you reread the chapter, now that you've kind of got an introduction to the chapter, think about kind of how these two guys behaved as scientists. How did they generate questions? What were the questions that they generated? Did they do everything by themselves, or did they get collaborators on over time? If they got collaborators over time, who were those collaborators, and why do you think they got collaborators if things were going fine with just the two of them up to that point? This chapter is not only a good introduction to the case study, it is also a good introduction to how scientists do their work, and you should be paying attention to those things as well as we go through this. Questions?
Wait, so what thing are we actually doing the literature summary on?
Brody and Bernie, 1994. the first paper in the list of papers at the end of the case study.
Is that on Moodle?
It is on Moodle.
Yeah,
And I sent it to you on an email. So, hold on, before you leave,
I just looked.
before you leave, don't leave yet.
What a little thingy. What is that? Is that prey dog?
Oh, gosh.
What is that?
This is my computer messing up.
No, what is that?
That's a prairie dog
Prey dog.
from the Wichita Mountains in,
I wanna
out
give
in
it a hug.
Oklahoma.
It looks so cute.
In the schedule, open up the schedule. I just downloaded it. Oh, I thought I just downloaded it. Download the schedule, open up the schedule.
School's out. I'm ready for summer break.
Okay, why is the schedule blank?
Everyone's going to class next week. Thanksgiving.
Okay. Birdie and Birdie, 1990. That is due 3rd of December.
Okay, and then where did we see it?
Literature summary in hand, ready to discuss. So I'm guessing it should be in the week of December 3rd?
Will we get our literature?
Yes, our goal is to get them back in time for you to use them to have comments back. Wait. Oh, nope.
Hey,
It's not there, I need to get it sorted. It should be, I'm not sure why it's not. Wait. Oh. It is. It is in a folder called December 3rd materials.
perfect.
Big Butch, little Butch.
I tried.
Find it. And get it on there.